Welcome to the Tessa Tubbs Podcast. This show is for people refining what success means and choosing to live in alignment with who they actually are. Before we go any further, I want to acknowledge something. Many of us are moving through our lives holding a lot of responsibility, expectations, and care for others, often without much room or space to be fully human ourselves in the process. Today's conversation lives right there, not in performance or polish, but in the real lived experience of what it takes to show up honestly, to be seen, and to create space for others without disappearing yourself. That's the context for this conversation. My guest today is Rachael Lewis. Rachael is the owner of Honey and Sage Salon, a former educator, and someone who has navigated multiple reinventions professionally and personally by choosing alignment over expectation. Rachael knows what it means to be the only in the room, to lead through vulnerability and to hold space for others while learning how to hold herself with the same care. Her work and her life reflect a deep commitment to creating environments where people feel safe, seen, and grounded. Rachael, I'm really glad you're here.
Thank you for having me.
So Rachael, before we zoom in on a specific moment, I'm curious, when you hear this framing around vulnerability, safety, and holding space, what resonates the most with you right now?
I think for me, it's the fact that it's not a one and done. Vulnerability is a state of being, and it's something that I have had to learn through the course of my life. And even though I've learned how to be that, I'm still having to actively do it and be really uncomfortable in that. My life is ever changing. I'm having things happen even now, even since I met you a few months ago. And so going through things where you do have to show your underbelly a little bit, it never starts being easy to do. I just know how to do the things that aren't as easy now.
That makes a lot of sense. And so with that, maybe we can double click. I'd love for you to sort of take a moment and share with us a moment where vulnerability truly changed something for you or for someone else or for a space you were holding.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so many examples I can think of. Just a very recent one. I left education in 2021 after teaching during COVID year, and I went to hair school and reinvented my career, and that came at a big personal cost in my life. And having done that now, I am someone who the other people that I know and that were part of that professional life before, some of them are looking at the same journey and they're coming to me saying, "Hey, you did this. Like, can you show me the blueprint? Can you give me the support?" And so I think that just like being willing to really talk about it, to tell my reasons, to tell the ups, the downs, the pros, the cons. I think that's the honesty has helped some of them make choices. So I have a friend who I think just put her notice in at her school this past week, and she's looking at making a big change. And I know that I'm so proud of her, and it's so scary, but it can also be so worthwhile and change the trajectory of your life. And I mean, to me, life is not about work, it's about happiness. And we work, but we work to live. We don't live to work. And so I think for her, it's given her that peace that she needs because it came from a place where I struggled and I was honest about why I was struggling and what it took to work through that struggle.
Yeah, you mentioned that at the front end about how, this shift came with great sacrifice for you. I'm just curious, if you could think back to that time, what felt risky about showing up honestly for yourself in that moment?
Oh my gosh, so many things. I was leaving. It wasn't a great income, but it was at least a steady income. I knew that the paycheck was going to roll into the bank. I had 4 children at home. We have pets and mortgage and all the things. And, knowing that it was going to create financial instability. Not only that, but going to school, I wasn't going to have any income for a full year.
Mm.
And I was extremely privileged to be in a position where that could happen. It was a short-term thing. We made do, but that was uncomfortable. Another thing was just when you are in education, I think this is true in a lot of fields, but especially in education, it's like a family so many times because you are literally working side by side with people to raise children, to help children be better than they were, to teach them, but you care about them as human beings. And I worked alongside so many people that were like that. So to go to my work family and say, "Hey, I love you all so much, but I'm piecing out." That was really scary because that was telling my people I was leaving them and also opening me up to judgment and criticism. And there weren't many voices like that. But I mean, I'm sure some people, to my face were saying, "Oh, that's cool." And behind my back, they're like, "She's crazy." Um, and now, I think a lot of people have seen that journey and they've come to me and said, "Hey, I'm really proud of you. That's very cool that you did that." And even if they're still teaching, it's just the fact that I wasn't settling for just fine. I was looking for something more. Um, so I think that was a big thing. My kids really were a big part of it. They had to do a lot of sacrificing, as did my husband. But my children, all four of them had to change schools and leave all the teachers and friends that they knew behind in order for me to leave because where I was teaching in my district, they were allowed to go outside of zone since I was an employee. And so we had moved where we originally lived was in that zone and we had moved houses and we were out of zone. So at that point, all the kids had to change schools. Some of them, had to go to the rival school across town that they had always competed against and, booed at the games and that kind of thing. That's not a small sacrifice. And, I just can't imagine the bravery it took on their part. And they were all just immediately like, "Yes, go do this, mom. Like, we want you to be happy. We want you to have what you want." They were down from the get go. So it was a lot of sacrifice. It was a lot of change, just telling everybody in my life. Um, I think the moment that I most closely relate that to was the moment when my husband and I told our family and friends several years ago that we were planning to adopt two children from foster care, and we already had two biological children. And I think to our face, a lot of people are like, "Oh, that's great." And behind our backs, they're like, "What?" And not that they weren't supportive of the idea, but just it was a little cuckoo. It was an intense moment. And so I know that there were some people that didn't understand it, even if they caught up in their understanding later. And so, yeah, I guess that judgment from your peers, it doesn't matter to me the way it used to. But of course, you want your loved ones to support you and to, really like have your back.
I love that. First of all, thank you so much for sharing so candidly and things that we often don't talk about and we sort of tuck away. So really leaning into that vulnerability because, financial instability, that's uncomfortable. Relational, disruption, that's uncomfortable. Asking our loved ones, our spouses, our kids to take on the risk with us. So many people stay in unsettled, mediocre, soul sacrificing or soul sucking environments because we don't want to disrupt the apple cart. We're not willing to play through those type of sacrifices. And I think it's important you have that end, and then you have the other end where it's like, I can just go and do things and there's no price to pay. There's always a price to pay. It's the intentionality and being able to identify what some of those sacrifices are going to be. I'm curious, when you shifted, like after you made that call and you stepped out into these things, what shifted for you once you chose presence over protection? And what shifted for some of the people around you as well?
I think for me, it was just a massive weight that lifted off my chest, and it had been put there so gradually that I didn't realize it. It's kind of that frog in the pot scenario of you don't realize how deeply you're in until all of a sudden the water's boiling and you're done. And so for years that had been building where it was just a little drop at a time. And then all of a sudden, when I made this change, this massive weight lifted off of me at once. And it was like I could breathe again. Uh,
Wow.
It was like I had space in my brain. For an example, I learned about myself that when I came home from teaching, and that was also teaching while I had all four of my kids in and around me all the time because they were riding to school with me. They were in my classroom in the mornings, they were in my classroom in the afternoons while I was teaching my last class period. They were riding home with me. They were staying late with me when I was grading papers, whatever. I think that really, hang on, I'm losing my my train of thoughts, jumping the station here. Uh, what was
So
I
you
getting
were
ready?
talking about the the what changed for you once you made that shift into really being present and not worried about, protection, and what shifted for you and what shifted for those around you?
Yeah. Oh. And so the thing that I really noticed was that when I came home from school after having been with 120 students all day and my own kids and momming and teaching at the same time, is I would have to go sit in a dark room and turn off everything
Oh,
for
wow.
about 15 minutes. I would just tell my kids, please don't knock on my door, don't ask things of me, don't fight with each other outside my door, don't breathe in my direction, don't even think thoughts at me for 15 minutes. And I was having to do this intense reset because my nervous system was just always out of alignment. It was just input coming at me all day long, every day. I've heard a statistic that teachers make more decisions in a day than neurosurgeons do. And I fully, completely believe that. And to do that, and then mothering as well. I mean, I'm sure from mothering, even if you have, whether you have one kid or 10 kids, it's just a barrage of needs because these tiny humans we create or bring into our lives can't do for themselves yet. And so you're picking up all that slack. And so I think for me, having that weight lifted was a massive deal. I also felt, while simultaneously scared, I was also really proud of myself, and I don't think I had gotten to feel that very much. I think I felt that when I received my master's degree, knowing that I had worked really hard for that while I was in my teaching years. But other than that, a lot of it was just toil, 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 no payoff to that, I guess. No, you'd have those moments with students, but there never was a great moment where they're like, "Yes, you have done an amazing job. We're so proud of you." And all of a sudden it was like permission to myself for me to say to myself, "Yes, you have done an amazing job. I'm so proud of me." And that's a hard thing to do. That's not something I grew up doing. I remember my dad always, had this philosophy of like, don't praise her. She might get the big head is what he always said. And
Yeah.
I'm like, that's not my psychology, dad. That's not me. I'm not in any, danger of thinking too much of myself. Quite the opposite. And so allowing myself to really be my own cheerleader and mean it, that was pretty revolutionary for me. Um, Also just my body felt different. I can't tell you that, if you looked at my labs from my doctor's office, if they would show a significant change, but I felt very different in just the way my body functioned. I felt less tired. I had more energy. My spirit was more positive. When I saw people that I hadn't seen in a while, I heard this quite a bit. They were like, "You seem lighter." And I was like, "You know what? I feel it. I really do. I feel that." And so I know that for me, it was just all of those moments were like little nods, little affirmations of, "Yes, girl, keep doing this. You're going the right way." And it led me to a place of happiness that I hadn't experienced in a long time. It was so welcome, kind of like getting in a warm bath after you're freezing cold all day long and you just feel your body relieved. And that's what I got emotionally and spiritually too.
That's amazing. And what I love about your story is, you don't get those feelings until you make the call and you cross over. And so the fact that you can articulate both the sacrifices and the things that, were scary, but then also once you made the call and you stepped into it, the gifts, the benefits, the perks that came with it. I'm curious, as you look back on that season, what did you come to understand more clearly about yourself? Not who you were expected to be, but who you actually were. What did you discover more about Rachel?
I definitely, if I didn't already know before that I could do almost anything I set my mind to, I figured that out really fast. And it created this sense of competence within me. And I think I feel very self assured now that I can rise to any challenge and I think I already had a bit of that because honestly, I think teachers in general are amazing. And of course, you work with one every now and then that shouldn't be there. But for the vast majority of them, if you put a teacher in almost any profession,
Hmm.
they will figure out how to absolutely be a rock star in it because teachers as a whole are adaptable. And I think that was a fantastic thing that I really had refined for me in my years of teaching. And so teaching is still with me, even though that's not where I am. But that adaptability just like has made me be able to rise to almost any challenge. And so I feel very grateful for that, to be honest.
I love that reminder because it made me think about a mentor this is quite some time ago where I decided to make a professional shift. And I was nervous about going into a space that, I had not done before, and was talking to him about it. And he said something similar to what you just said about teaching. He was just like, Tessa, you're missing a point. You're assuming you're starting at scratch. You're not. You're going to take what you've done before, and there are skills you're going to transfer with you. So I love that you call that out, that you didn't just make the shift, you carried lessons, carried skills, carried knowledge and abilities with you into that transition as well. That's beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. You're starting from a place of experience.
Right.
So, now that I'm in my 40s, I can try new things. I want to try new things. I'm still curious about life and the world, and I'm not through figuring me and my environment out. But everything that came with me, is going to be part of that. Like, there was a story I used to teach to my sixth graders, and it was called 11 by Sandra Cisneros. And it presents this idea that every year that we grow is kind of like an onion or like the rings of a tree,
Mm,
where inside you're kind of all these ages at once. You can have moments where, this little girl who's 11, she has a moment where it's a breakdown and she feels 3 inside and she feels vulnerable and scared and cries about something. And then she feels older and then she can figure things out. And I think that's true. We have all of those experiences. So I feel like I'm not just living for me now. I feel like I'm living to make like teenage me proud. I'm making choices where I'm like, teenage me would look at adult me and be like, she's great, And that's exactly it, because I don't think we always have the audacity when we're younger. We don't have that confidence because we don't have that lived experience to teach us that we can live how we want. We can choose to do things that are scary because they're worthwhile. I think a lot of times we live in fear, especially when we're younger, and that fear being removed from me a little bit. I think that age really worked in my, favor in this particular case. And so I love it. It was weird, honestly, being, I turned 40 when I was in hair school. It was weird being 40 years old, surrounded by like 18 to 23-year-olds generally, going through their hair school experience. That did not really detract from it though. Like, I still found myself finding things to connect with them about. I found that I was able to give them some wisdom. They were able to teach me things. It was just like a very cool experience. But I felt like my age too worked to my benefit. Um, at 40 years old, I've been a client in a hair salon for many, many years. I've
right.
had great experiences. I've had not so great experiences. And now, as a stylist and as a salon owner, I know what that feels like from the other end. I understand that, like, a client's gonna have anxiety coming to me for the first time. I understand that they may not know all the things I know, just basic, like, how do we shampoo our hair correctly so that we don't damage it, so that we give it what it needs?
Hmm.
And then, what that feels like if someone doesn't listen to you well enough. I had stylists that I loved and thought were amazing, but sometimes they just wouldn't quite listen. And I think if you talk to the vast majority of my clients, that's what they would tell you. They're like, I love the way that Rachel listens to me. Like, she really hears what I want and she tries to help me achieve that very thing because it's a conversation, you know?
Yes.
And so I think that all of those past life experiences were honestly like part of the superpower I gained coming into it, because I had to gain skills just like everybody else. But they can't know, if they're 18 years old, they can't know what it's like to do all the things I have done in that time either.
I love that. So as you're describing, I think it's just one more example of what it's like to be the only or the first in certain spaces, right? How did that experience reshape either your internal dialogue or how you've learned to lead? Because I think there's a lot of people that may be listening to us that, like, oh, this is great, but I'm the only one. And how can I do that if I'm the only one or I'm the first and I'm scared to stand out or speak up? What did you learn from being the only and the first that you can share with them?
Yeah. I think that the way that I related to all the people around me on a daily basis really had to change, because as a teacher, especially I worked in middle school for the longest, you're with all these kids all day long every day, and you really are the authority figure. You are the one that, and I never was that person that said, I have all the answers. If I didn't know, I would be very clear about that. Like, you know what? I'm not sure, but let me work on that. Let me ask some questions or let's find out together. And it was always that idea of collaboration, even though kids were young, like that was important for them to see that modeled. But as I got in hair school, I'm not the authority over the peer next to me. And it doesn't matter what their age is or what their experience is. We're peers. We're going through the same thing side by side. And that's true when you walk into a salon environment. And I was in a big salon for a time, and then I had one of the ladies that I worked with, and she was much younger than me. We left and we started our own salon suite. And suddenly I was working with somebody, and I'm old enough to be her mother. And I was not the boss and she was not the underling. We were true partners in this. And so, again, I think it comes back to that adaptability, because it was me making sure that I was in the correct role and not letting past experience, not just being that domineering kind of,
Hmm.
I'm the authority figure personality. And I've seen a lot of people that they can't step out of it. I think that's one of the things that I had seen with, my students, and I've talked to my kids about. You do have to learn to be both a follower and a leader and know when to make the switch. And not everybody figures that out. There are
That's key.
people that in the wrong spaces, they're trying to assert their authority and they wind up hindering instead of helping. And I don't want to be that person.
That's well said. You talked about earlier just in terms of the sacrifices and some of the changes. And one of the things you honed in on was even just the process of communicating with your family, whether it was your, family at home or your work family, and wondering about expectations of what people might say or judgment. Tell me a little bit about where that responsibility shift from managing expectations or maintaining harmony to owning what you needed to be true. What was that like for you, and then what changed once you made that shift?
Yeah. I think the most pertinent example I can think of is the conversation I had with my husband. So I will preface this by saying my husband was an amazing support, but I also need people to know that I don't live a fairy tale life, and he wasn't just automatically like, "Yes, let's do that. Let's reduce our income and let's struggle." He wasn't on board immediately. And that's okay. Like, I'm secure enough in my relationship where I could look at him and say, "Hey, hey, 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 wait just a second. Let's back up." I feel like I had almost like prepaid this sort of debt that we would be going into. Because a little bit of our backstory is he's a veterinarian. And when we graduated from undergrad, we moved out of state and went to someplace else for him to do his education. And I worked hard at a job that I hated for 4 years to put him through vet school. So he had to do, very little of that outside work, and he could just focus on being the best student that he could and absorbing the most that he could. And it was a sacrifice that I willingly made. I would make it again, time and time again, because it was going to support what he loved and what he wanted. And so when I came to him first and he said, "I don't know about this. I want you to be happy, but also like that's a lot." I was able to not just be like, "Well, he's a jerk," and that conversation was over. I was able to look at him and say very clearly, "Hey, I need you to stop and really like look at me. Do I look okay? Does it look like things are going well in my life?" And he was able to truly see me and say, "No, I don't think they are. I see you. I see what you're saying." And we were able to honestly have that conversation because it wasn't an easy one. It really was looking at all of the ins and outs of what's our life look like? How do we manage this financially? How do we manage this? With the kids having to change, how do we go forward when so much of our life is going to have to be different? But I was just very grateful that we had that kind of relationship where I could just come to him and say, "Hey, this is a problem that I'm struggling with, and I need your help." And even though it wasn't that immediate connection, there was enough like understanding and friendship and support between us that we were able to figure it out. And so I think it's a thing to remember, is that like things aren't always easy. Um, it can look from the outside like I just have such a simple time with it. Oh, just the most amazing support. But the truth is, I kind of fought for that support. And the second that he heard what I had to say, he was like, "You know what? You're right. I hear you. I've got your back." But, if my husband had bucked up against me when I said, "Hey, I need to do this, I need to make this change," I would have struggled. And I see how a lot of people can feel very stuck because it's not just as simple as, "I want to do this, let's do this." There truly are physical barriers. I mean, we see that all the time. We see that with, you know, all kinds of justice issues, whether it's inequalities in, in relationships, inequalities with, people struggling with, immigration status or race or whatever it is. Like, it's not always that simple. And we've got to be real with ourselves and our support system about what those barriers are. Because if you don't even talk about it, how can you possibly figure out how to work around it?
Yeah, you actually moved into a space that I was keen to get to in our conversations. I remember, just, as you said, meeting you a few months ago and the chats we've had between, then and now. One of the things that really struck me, and even in this dialogue, is about how much creating space relationally and professionally where people feel safe to show up as they are, how important that is to you. And so I'm curious, where do you see people longing for safe space right now? And what do you think is actually getting in the way of that?
I think that right now, I mean, let's just be real. It kind of feels a little bit like the world's on fire right now. That there's so many struggles out there. There's so much happening. Um, I know that, like, for example, I live in an area where there's not a lot of social justice, and that's really important to me. It impacts my family. It impacts my loved ones. And I'm just a person that I really care about everybody. I think that was, like, as a teacher, I literally did not care where my students come from. Those were my kids. And if it hurts them, it hurts me too. And so I think that, people are really needing community badly. I also see that, like, I see examples of that both in a lot of the men around me. I think that with women, I draw a lot of strength from women. And I have noticed that, like, within my life, all of the women around me are so amazing and supportive and strong. But the thing that's like our superpower is that we really have community. And when we need help, we're reaching out to each other and we're being each other's strength. And I see men that are isolated from each other. And even if they are together, they're not necessarily talking about the things that really matter. It's surface level. It's, yes, it's bro time, but it's not the level of support you need. Like, for me in my job, I sit with individuals in a private space all day. And a lot of those people are my friends or are people or clients that, you come to have a deeply personal relationship. You talk about a lot of personal stuff back and forth. And so I wind up processing all of my stuff going on in my life, probably too much sometimes. And then my husband, who works around a tremendous amount of people, but has to, like, bear the weight of a lot of heaviness in his job. And then he comes home and talks to nobody. And so I think that's not isolated to him. The more and more people I talk to, the more I realize a lot of my friends, husbands or partners are much the same. And they're just really lacking that community. Because I feel like we have made it where guys can't be vulnerable a lot of times. Um, and I think that's just across the board. I think anytime you feel, like you said, like the only one in the room,
Hmm.
whether you're out politically, whether you're out racially, whether you're out because of your gender, whether you're out because of your circumstances, you feel like you need someone who just understands a little bit of where you are. And so I think that's a big space. Um, and I know for me in particular, I have created hopefully a space where people feel really loved and really safe to be who they are. And it's become sort of a beacon, especially to gay and trans community, because two of my children fall under the LGBTQ umbrella, and one of my children is trans. And that being said, that has opened doors because other people realize that they are perfectly safe in my hands, and that I'm gonna love and protect them the way I would love and protect my own too. And so I think we need that. I know that there's certain instances where when I know what somebody's about, it makes me feel instantly unsafe and I don't wanna be around it. And I find myself seeking community where I can just relax, because we all need that. We all need to be able to unmask and to drop any armor that we carry on ourselves, because, that's the opposite of vulnerability, is having to walk around like that all the time, tensed up and just waiting for, a strike almost. Um, so yeah, I think it's true that in these times, there's just a lot of people that need to reach out. And sometimes they don't know how, they don't know where to begin. They feel like nobody understands. And really, the truth of it is there probably are a whole lot of people that understand. You just haven't connected with them yet.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there's definitely lots of research out there, particularly around how our society raised, the differences between how males are raised and females are raised. And as women, we are definitely, taught to be in relationship and community with each other, even from, playground years. So it's not surprising to see that difference in adult life. But I would also say one of the challenges we often hear about, particularly amongst women, is overfunctioning, right? Because we're supposed to be the caregivers, the mothers, the wives, the boss ladies, all the things. So for that woman who is overextended, maybe share a little bit about how you've learned to hold space for others without disappearing yourself or abandoning yourself in the process.
Yeah. I was just having a great conversation about this with my friend Felicia the other day. And you are absolutely right that every woman I know, especially mothers, are so overtaxed. And we have always been taught to be these excellent multitaskers. And we were told that that was wonderful. And what we were never told is that it's okay to set up a boundary. And I heard a really cool thing the other day. Jamila Jamil, the actress and activist, was on a podcast and she said, I'm not living for me now. I'm living for 85-year-old me. I
Mm,
am thinking about who I was, who I will be when I'm 85 years old. And I'm looking back and saying, what would she want me to do? What would she want me to wear? What would she want me to eat? Where would she want me to go? And it draws to mind another piece of wisdom that my grandma always said, which is it'll never be noticed on a galloping horse, and that just means let the little stuff go. And so I think it's helped me shift. There's been a lot of conversations and a lot of little nuggets like that have entered my brain over the years. And it's helped me realize saying no, first of all, is a complete sentence. Saying no to things that aren't priorities doesn't matter. And when you have 4 kids, it is constantly chaos. You feel like you are taming the lion with the chair in one hand, and you are juggling with the other hand, and the elephant's going berserk behind you, and your circus is always a little bit on fire. And so when other people came up, they're like, can you just, nope, no, I cannot. And you start learning to become comfortable saying no. I feel like that's a gift that age has given me too, where I'm a lot more comfortable setting up a boundary. Like, for example, I'm fairly politically active in my area, and I've had people come to me and say, well, would you ever consider running for office? Would you do this? Would you do that? Would you volunteer for this? And I'm like, hey, in the future, I can totally see myself in those roles. But right now, my focus is exactly where it needs to be, which is keeping my kids happy and healthy, keeping myself happy and healthy. I'm just going to try to, take care of my own mental health, drink my water, have good relationships, have friendships, and do things to create joy. So in the future, when I have more bandwidth, yes, right now, bandwidth is full, no more room at the end. Um, and so I think that that's been a big thing for me because I was going slowly insane when I was teaching. That was part of my issue right there was constantly being overtaxed. Hence the having to go in a room for 15 minutes and sit in the dark every day when I got home. That was my nervous system telling me you aren't doing well. And so I have decided I'm no longer interested in feeling that way. And that doesn't mean I don't have any responsibility to anyone, but it does mean that I am making sure that my energy is being spent correctly. And as Taylor Swift said, you should think of your energy as a luxury item and not everyone can afford it. I only have a set amount of energy and I have to decide each day, what are my priorities? Where do these things go? I don't do great at it every day. Some days are better than others, but I think overall it is my health and happiness, my kids' health and happiness, my relationship, and keeping my business afloat in that order. But all those other little voices, sometimes I just have to say, not today, not today.
I love that. There was a quote that I learned, I think it was maybe a middle of last year that I've been carrying with me. And it talks about how empathy without boundaries is self-sabotage disguised as grace. And I think it's this notion of, when we want to help and we're caring people, we want to do for others. But if you do it to the point that you don't have boundaries and you don't protect yourself and put your own oxygen mask on, what we think we're doing is like graceful, kind, generous, but it's really self-sabotage in disguise. And so holding that tension between those two worlds, as you said, is so important. And I know even for myself on that journey, got to the place where like you, where I could say no, but I would feel so guilty for the no that I would explain why I'm saying no to the nth degree. But even as I've gotten older, I don't need to explain my no either.
Right.
So, right. So just really making that shift and growing into that. And that takes time, especially when for those of us who that wasn't taught to us early, but we have that ability to learn and to build that skill set and capability for sure.
Yeah, I've heard a great phrase, and it's one that comes to mind often, and it said, "Don't light yourself on fire to keep someone else warm."
Ooh, well said. Well
Yeah.
said.
So that little nugget sits in my brain all day, every day. And I mean, that does not mean that I'm not giving, and it doesn't mean that I'm not putting my energies out there because I certainly am. I still very much care about the people and the world around me. But if I sacrifice myself, you kind of become like The Giving Tree by Shel Silverstein, to where there's nothing left. Like I'm almost that book, I almost like didn't want to read it to my girl children because
Right.
I'm like, what you might be getting here is that the tree was so great because it gave up everything. I'm like, that's kind of a dangerous little message, even though it's a great book and I love it. That's a dangerous little message to give to people who are already prone to that self sacrifice. We don't need that. We need to be able to be giving without giving everything to where there's nothing left. You still have enough to be able to regenerate, you know?
Absolutely. Well, Rachel, before we close, I want to make space for you to share with people where they can learn more about your work at Honey and Sage or how they can stay connected with you.
Yeah, absolutely. You can always follow me on socials. I'm on Instagram, I'm on TikTok, I'm on Facebook, and I'm at Honey and Sage Salon. Or you can also look at Salt and Waves Hair. Or you can go to my website, and I'm sure there will be a link to it here. But I'm on Gloss Genius at honeyandsagesalon.com. And so on there, I have examples of my work, talks a little bit about who I am, the space that I create, and you can always reach out to me there. You can send me messages through the website if you have questions. And whether you're near or far, I will be glad to reach out with you, whether you want to network, whether you need to come in as a client, or you just have questions about this podcast. I'm glad to hear it.
And for those of you who are interested, Rachel also has a TED Talk out there. I highly encourage you to check it out. And if this conversation resonated, I invite you to follow the podcast and join us for the next episode where we'll continue exploring what it looks like to lead yourself and build a life that actually holds up over time. Thanks everyone for tuning in today.